This is the worst I've ever had.
Oh no. I just said, oh
Okay.
no.
Yeah, I just.
Oh, there it is. We can see it.
Do you see it now? Okay. Yay. Good.
Beautiful. Hey, Jody, I have one request. When you're going through, if you're going to talk about any of your book, would you please list the title so that we can go look for it by title?
Sure.
You're using any examples or anything?
Well, all I'm doing is basically going to share a little bit about my writing journey, and I will have a few pictures of my books up as I talk about them.
And I'm
So you'll
recording
see
this, so I
the
can check
title.
it out.
Okay, sounds good. Great.
And I'm
Yeah.
recording it too, so don't worry.
Okay. Well, let's start. I don't know how many of you know me, but I've been married about 30 years to my college sweetheart. And as I said, we live in Central Michigan, and you can see the green star there. Yeah. And I've lived here for 22 years. And how I keep track of how long I've lived here is 2 months after I moved, I gave birth to twin daughters.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so they were born 9 weeks premature and were only 3 pounds when they were born. And
Wow.
I ended up, they ended up being in the NICU for about a month. So it was like we moved here and boom, everything happened all at once.
Oh my.
And so I also had a 2-year-old son at the time. And so our life here in Michigan, those first few years is just kind of a blur.
Wow.
But now my children range from 24, my oldest, down to my baby who's 16. And she's going to be a junior in high school, or is. There's my family. This was at my daughter's graduation. My twins who are in the graduation robes, they graduated from Cedarville University, which is in Ohio, and they graduated in May. So that's my family. And as you can see, I have 5 kids. And so my writing journey has been very busy and unique, to say the least.
Because you homeschooled, didn't you homeschool?
I did, yeah. I'm going to talk a little bit about that because that does play a factor in my writing journey. Like many of you, I was born with a pen in my hand, most likely, and I filled up notebooks. As when I was growing up, I filled up notebooks, longhand with stories. And my passion for writing really did follow me into adulthood. I wanted to be a writer, but like most aspiring writers, I really struggled to know how I could use my gifts and abilities in a career. And so when my college years came, I decided I needed to focus on something that would pay the bills while I wrote my novels on the side. So I went to Taylor University, which is in Indiana, and eventually to the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And I got my master's degree in social work. So I did social work for a lot of years before I had kids. And during that whole time that I was going to school and working, I kept learning about writing, and I kept writing. And it was during those post-college years when I was working and newly married before I had kids that I wrote my first 5 novels. And I really studied the craft of writing. Like I read every how-to book I could get my hands on. And those days, that was before the internet. So you had to go to the library and check out books and all that good stuff. And so during that particular time, after I had written those 5 novels, I felt like I was getting really close to being ready for publication. In those days, you had to print out your manuscripts, you had to rubber band them together, and you had to send them in to publishers. And so I had gotten to the point where I had started sending in some of my work, and had gotten a phone call from an editor who was interested in one of my novels. And so I knew I was getting close to being ready for publication, but I also was getting rejections as well. And so I knew that I had to write numerous books and really work hard at this. So I didn't ever look at those first 5 novels as wasted attempts. They were truly stepping stones for me on the path to becoming and training and preparing for being an author. And so as life would have it, at that point in time, right when I was starting to get some interest from editors, my life took a little detour. Isn't that the way it usually happens?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I had, my twins were born at that time. And so so shortly after they were born, I was sleep deprived and changing diapers full time. And so I decided I needed to take a break from writing. I had the 2-year-old in my, and it was just crazy. Life was crazy. So I actually set aside my writing for about 7 years. And now, as I look back over those 7 years, I can really see that hiatus helped mature me in so many ways, spiritually, emotionally, just helped me grow and deepen, so that by the time I came back to my writing, I was just in a different place. And so that was a really good thing. But it was also during that hiatus that I started homeschooling my kids. And that was a really neat experience for me in learning history. It had been so many years since I'd learned, studied history and taken history classes in school. So I began to learn a lot, just a ton. And it was so much fun doing history with my kids, because I was learning right alongside them. And so that's when my interest in history was really perked up, and I began reading about great heroes of the Christian faith, and those particularly who were long forgotten by our modern world. And that really started changing. I guess it just really inspired me at that point, because I thought, oh my goodness, I'm reading about all these, especially about these women who stood beside these great heroes of the faith. And I really want to know more about them, and I want to bring them to life. I started to want to really tell their stories. But as it happened, it wasn't until after I had my 5th baby that I really felt the urge to write again. And so it was about that time that I read a biography about John Bunyan. And as you know, he's the writer of Pilgrim's Progress. So I read a tiny excerpt about his wife, his second wife, actually, whose name was Elizabeth. And it just stirred my curiosity, just like my curiosity had been growing. And so my imagination just turned on at that point in a way it hadn't done in many years, probably because of sleep deprivation. But at that point, I began to think about this particular woman and just who she was and what was her real story. And so the first book that I wrote after my long hiatus was The Preacher's Bride. Oh. And at the time that I wrote this book, my youngest 2 children were still very little. And so I had to sneak in writing time. I did it during their nap time, and I would often sneak away after they were in bed at night and try and get in a little bit more. And in all, the book took me about a year to write, doing it that way. And so then when I finished, I decided it wouldn't hurt to send it out to publishers and see what happened. So this has been a long time since I've been sending out books, and I realized things had changed drastically in that time since I've been sending out books before, after the invention of the internet. And so I quickly realized that I needed to use the internet, and that was a challenge at that time for me. And I also learned that publishers no longer accepted manuscripts, just sending them in, that you had to actually find a literary agent. And I was like, what's that? And so I learned how to research, and I began to really just explore what the whole publishing industry was like. And as I also began to explore, I also realized wow, it's really tough right now to get a book published. And, oh, is this really going to happen? It's hard for debut authors to break into traditional publication. And so I was kind of depressed and a little bit discouraged by the state of it, quite frankly. But even finding an agent seemed somewhat bleak. At the time, very few agents were accepting clients. And so I wasn't sure what to do, but I figured, you know what, I don't have anything to lose by not sending this out. So I sent out the queries, is what that is, when you send out a little sample of your book and you write a little letter and you send that to various agents and explain who you are. And so I sent that out with my little sample of my book and sat back and waited, and slowly the rejections started trickling back in. By agents who were just too busy to even take a look at the manuscript. And so The Preacher's Bride was rejected by every agent I sent it to, except one. Except one. Yep. Only one agent showed even the slightest interest, and she told me she liked my query and asked me to send her the entire manuscript. So I did. And I was just super excited. And so was still very naive. And I was checking my email several times a day. And like, whoa, somebody's interested. I did not realize how slow a process submission could be. And so 1 week passed into 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then months.
Yeah.
And I didn't hear one word from this one agent who was interested. So I was getting a very firsthand learning experience of the hard knocks of the modern publishing industry. And I quickly realized that it was tough. Yeah, it was tough. But in the meantime, I decided I would keep writing. So that year, as The Preacher's Bride continued to languish in this particular agent's slush pile, I put my heart and soul into writing another book. And so you might be wondering, well, how did I get my big break? I mean, the picture of the book's right there. It obviously went on to get published. Well, what happened is I entered the Genesis contest through ACFW. And this, as you, or maybe some of you don't know, this is a contest for unpublished writers that ACFW, the national chapter, holds every year. And it's one of those things where you send in the sample and it's judged by various authors, and they pick finalists and narrow it down to winners. And so The Preacher's Bride and the second book I had been working on, both of those finaled in that particular year. And so I immediately contacted the agent who had that book on her computer or wherever it was, and I alerted her to the fact that my manuscripts had finaled, and she was very well aware of that contest. And so that was all it took for her to yank that manuscript out of her slush pile and read it. And so I contacted her on a Friday to let her know. And 3 days later, she called and offered me representation. So that's how I got. It was because of the Genesis contest. And within the span of about 3 months, she orchestrated a book deal with Bethany House Publishers. And so they are the ones who published The Preacher's Bride. And so that was the start of my writing career as a published author, a traditionally published author. And since The Preacher's Bride, I have gone on to publish over 30 full-length novels. And so that it's a very short and condensed version. I'm no longer with that agent. I've actually have a different agent now, and have worked with multiple publishers besides Bethany House. I still do work with them, but they were my very first one, and they've been a joy to work with. So the Brides of Faith collection consists of The Preacher's Bride and actually 2 other books inspired by real life women from history. That was kind of my passion at the time that I started. And I really wanted to bring these forgotten women to life. And so the next book that was published by Bethany House was called The Doctor's Lady. And this is actually inspired by a real life woman. Her name was Narcissa Whitman. And in 1836, she married Dr. Whitman, a man she barely knew. Here's some paintings of them. She barely knew this man and she married him. And she married him and left her childhood home the next day after their wedding. And she never returned to her home in New York City or New York. But she and her husband went west for the purpose of starting a mission among the natives in what at that time was called Oregon country. It wasn't even a part of the United States at that time. And so she was the first woman, white woman, to make what was known as the unheard of journey for females. Going that length all the way across the country at that time was considered unheard of for a woman. And because of her willingness to make this trip, we had the birth of the Oregon Trail. That's not a great picture, but you can see the dark blue line there of the Oregon Trail. And so she led the way for many women who would follow in her footsteps and was the brave soul to do that. So that's The Doctor's Lady. And the other book in this Hearts of Faith series is called Rebellious Heart. And this particular story is based on a famous American couple, John and Abigail Adams. And so much is known about our second president and his wife's relationship in their latter years due to their extensive letter writing to each other. We know that they had a very loving marriage and a beautiful friendship, but very little bit is known about their courtship. And so A Rebellious Heart explores the early days of their relationship. And so what you'll find in reading any of these first books of mine is that the names have all been changed. You won't see the actual like Abigail Adams in the book. Her name's been changed. You won't see John Bunyan in the book. His name's been changed. And it's very interesting that at the time that these books were being published, that biofiction or fiction based on real people of history had not really come of age. Like it wasn't selling well. And so at the time, my publishers asked me to just publish this as a historical romance inspired by these couples. So you'll see my author's note at the ends of these books explaining what's true and what's not. So it's interesting how trends kind of come and go in publishing, because now I have 2 books, 2 historicals that haven't. So there's the Hearts of Faith collection, all 3 of those. And now I have 2 books that actually I didn't have to change the names. And so actually the Luther and Katharina book was the second book that I wrote long ago that finaled in that Genesis contest along with The Preacher's Bride. And I saved that one because I did not want to change the name initially. So I held off on that until times changed a little bit and the market was more conducive to publishing it with the names intact. And the second one is called Newton and Polly, about John Newton, the writer of Amazing Grace.
Wow.
So as you can probably tell, I'm a historical writer. I write very much everything from the Middle Ages to the 1800s. And so research is a very important part of my process. And one way I do research is by visiting the location. And so while I'm not able to do that for every book, I really, really love when I'm able to go and get a hands-on feel for the location. And so obviously the disadvantage of doing that is that times have changed drastically in many cases, in most cases. For example, in this picture right here, you see the Adams house in Quincy, Massachusetts. Maybe some of you have visited there. It was John Adams' childhood home is the one in dark right behind the white one. But you see that it's on this hugely busy thoroughfare. And it's like right smack in the middle of like a downtown area. It's super busy, noisy, just a lot of, congestion. And so it really doesn't give you the feel for what it would have been like when he lived. And it's just very, very tough, even looking at this place, to try and imagine a farm there, and what it would have felt like to be there. And so that's one disadvantage of doing location research, is that you're not always able to envision what it would have been like, and you can't just take at face value what you see. But it is fun. And another place that I visited was for this book called An Undaunted Hope. And I have a lighthouse series of lighthouses set in Michigan around the Great Lakes. And this one is up on Lake Superior. And so one summer, I dragged my family with me and we went up north in northern Michigan to the Upper Peninsula, and we stayed in a little lightkeeper's cottage right next to a lighthouse. It was Eagle Harbor, and that was the lighthouse right on Lake Superior. And so that was a really neat place to stay. We were able to stay there for a whole week in this little assistant keeper's cottage, and we visited ghost towns and old mining towns and hiked. In fact, we got to go down into a copper mine, and then we walked along Lake Superior. It was just gorgeous, and watched sunsets. This was at 10:30 at night. And it was one of the most memorable research trips I've taken. But as you can imagine, even there, things are drastically different 150 years later. And so that means, even while it's fun to go on location, it's not necessarily the most important aspect of my research. In fact, I rely primarily on eyewitness accounts of a particular time period in the form of letters, books, or even articles. And so before starting a first draft, I usually read as many biographies as I possibly can, other time period related books. And so that's where I generate most of the authentic details that I'm looking for. So I won't take a whole lot more time on the research process, because I want to keep an eye on the time and make sure I leave enough time for questions. I also wanted to just share a little bit about my writing process, because as I mentioned, I have 5 children. And so writing, writing all of these books and researching them and doing all of this stuff really has been challenging for me. And so I really like to encourage writers to know that it is possible. Like, if I can do it, you can do it.
In fact, I first heard of you when I was complaining to my friend Lindsay about how I was struggling to find time to write, and I was struggling, with writer's block. And she said, "You need to read about Jody Headland." She goes, "That'll snap you out of it." And boy, did it ever.
Yeah. Well, I just, I've hoped that I've been able to encourage other writers, because what has happened to me is pretty common probably to any of us, no matter if you have 5 kids, 2 kids, or 5 dogs, or, aging parents, or whatever life stage you're in. We're going to get lots of interruptions. And so over the years, what I've learned is I can't wait for ideal circumstances to write. I can't wait for the perfect environment. That I just have to work in less than ideal circumstances. And so my life will always be a little, or even a lot, messy. And I can't wait for my office to be clean. I can't wait for my house to be clean. I can't wait for it to be quiet before I sit down and write. So, like I mentioned, when my children were really young and I was in the thick of mothering, I wrote at nap times and at night, after they were in bed. And I gave myself very small, manageable writing goals every day. And I knew and I wanted them to be manageable. I wanted it to be something I knew I could check off every day. And so it was as small as 300 words a day. And that was all. And it was enough, and it was hard. But 300 was manageable. And I gave myself, I said, you have to get those 300 words written, rain or shine, no matter what. Sick kids, even if you've got to sit down, you've got to write these 300 words a day. And so those 300 words a day added up to one book in a year. And because I completed and I kept to that goal, that helped me complete that novel. And as my kids got a little more independent and I added in other tricks and things to help myself carve out a little more time, I was able to increase my goal. So then it moved to 500 words a day. And that was manageable at that stage. And then it moved to 1,000 words. And then, as my kids got older and older and more independent, I could start to write a little bit more. And so now what I'm writing almost 3,000 words a day, which is between 8 to 10 pages. And honestly, some days the words flow faster than others, but I always make sure that I still have that mindset, like I have to finish my goal for the day. And so some days the words gush and other days they trickle. Yep. But either way, a writer must always keep the words flowing.
Nice.
So that piece of advice has really kept me moving over the years. And so I always make myself finish that daily word count before I move on to other aspects of a writer's job, like answering emails or doing marketing stuff or whatever it is. My first priority is making sure I get my words written. And so that has led me to the point where now I'm a full-time author, and I've moved from publishing one book a year to multiple books a year. So in fact, this year I have 6 books releasing.
I know,
Yep.
right?
Yeah. So that's
Amazing.
what it hasn't been 6 books bang from the start. It has taken years of working up to that. And so I don't want you to feel discouraged, like I've got to write 6 books. This has been a process for me over the years of increasing my writing muscles, if you want to say, and getting to the point where I'm able to sit down and do that kind of work. So this year, I have jumped into not the Westerns, but it's still historical romance, and I'm writing about Colorado cowboys. So Cowboy for Keeps came out in January, and The Heart of a Cowboy releases in about 3 weeks. And then this year, I also branched off into kind of a new genre for me, but a fun one. And I did some time travel. And so Come Back to Me released back in June. And I lose track of when I was been released. June. And so Come Back to Me, it starts off in the present time, and this woman travels back to the Middle Ages. And so it's sort of a medieval vibe. And Never Leave Me is the sequel to that, and that releases at the beginning of January, so in a few months. And then we also have a YA series that that will be releasing, and I've done several different young adult series, and this is a brand new series, and the first book releases in November, and Enamored releases in November, and Entwined releases in December. And so those are kind of a medieval fairy tale vibe to those books. And so, yeah, that wraps up where I've been and where I'm headed. And now I just want to open it up and see if you guys have any questions.
Well, I'm exhausted just from hearing that.
Do you write those simultaneously?
That's a good question.
No, I do not.
Okay, I was just wondering just because of those release days. Okay.
No, I do purposely like the rapid release schedule for certain books, because I think that especially when you're independently publishing, and that's something I didn't mention. Some of those books are independent and some are through publishing houses. When I publish my own books, I do like a rapid release schedule, which means I write them and then I have them edited and have the cover developed, and then I kind of hold off and I release them all bang, bang, bang.
Wow.
1 month after another, because it appeals to Kindle Unlimited readers who like to have their books very quickly released, and they're binge readers. And so I found that to be a very helpful technique. It's something, you can play around with a little bit. So I did that. I've done that with my own YA series. The first YA series I did was published with Zondervan. And then the last this will be my fourth one. And, the three now that I've done have all been rapid release schedules. But yeah, so to answer your question, no, I have a very detailed schedule where I plan out how long I'm going to take to work on a particular novel and write it. And I give myself, 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the length of it, and write it in that time. And then budget in a week or two between novels for editing projects that come my way, because editing is a constant thing. I feel like I'm in editing mode more than I actually am in writing mode, because I edit my books I read and edit my own books at least 5 times.
Wow.
And I also, for my independently published books, I hire out 2 different editors for 2 different stages, as well as all of my own editing. So they are very extensively edited, and my books with my publishing house are edited 3 times by them and 5 times by me. So you're editing all the time when you write that many books.
Whew. That's a lot.
Mhm. Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. I have several questions, but the first one, what is your editing process like when you edit 5 times? What do you do in those 5 times?
So the first time I self-edit, what I do when I finish a book is I put that book to bed for a little while. I tuck it away and try not to look at it for a few months. Sometimes it's 6 months, depends on how far ahead I am in the publishing schedule, so that I can come back to it with an objective view. Like, I don't want to write it and then just sit and pick at it. I really want to come back at it with a very objective view. And so the first time I edit it is a self-edit, and it's more of an overview, just coming back at the story, looking at it from all angles. So right now I just finished a self-edit. I'm turning in that book on Monday to Bethany House. So then they'll edit it. They'll have 2 or 3 different editors from their house read it and send me then what are called rewrite notes. And those are usually 6, 7, 8 pages of their notes of things they want me to change. And let me tell you, even after 30 books, that list never shortens. They always have a long list. I don't know why, but that's just the way it is. And so then I read it a second time, but this time I'm doing major rewrites. And that's the second time. Then the third time is called a line edit. So then once I'm done with my rewrites, I send it in again. And then a line editor edits it and sends it back to me, and I edit it again. And then I send that back, and they have a copy editor edit it. At that point, I print it out and I read it aloud to myself, and I catch all the little things. And then I send that in. And then they send me one more, and it's called the page proofs. So it is quite an extensive process. but it's all very good. It's a wonderful way to make sure that you're putting out the best thing possible. So I've learned a lot from traditional publication, and I try and replicate that in my own self-published books, if that makes sense. I can't do it to the same extent, but I do have the additional step that I have in my indie books is that I have what I call first readers, who after the book is proofed and gone through all of my editing, then I send it on to several different really keen-eyed readers who then will come back to me and give me any typos or anything they find that's wrong.
Yeah.
So that's a final step.
Let me tell you my other two questions. And one of those is, if you can tell me the name and the type of your Zondervan YA books. But my other question is, you've kind of moved around. It's historical, but what has caused you to kind of move almost from genre to genre?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I consider myself, to all of my books, to fall under the historical romance umbrella. So everything I write, because that is where my passion lies, is under historical romance. So any book you pick up of mine will be definitely a romance with historical, it's set in a historical time period. Now the historical time period will change. And so how I got started writing YA was, at the time I had a lot of all my kids were kind of in that young adult stage, and I wasn't finding a lot of romance for my daughters that was Christian. At the time, Melanie Dickerson was just starting off, and so she was about the only one. And so I just loved, and since I had become more prolific, I was able to write more. And so I decided I would try writing a series for my daughters. And so that's sort of how I got started. I loved it. I love having a little bit of variety, so I'm not always kind of stuck in one area. And that's just the way I am. And so that's sort of how I got started writing YA. And since I have developed a following in that, I've been able to continue to do that and build off of my Zondervan audience and readers. And so that has naturally led into them reading my indie YA, if that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question fully or not.
Yeah.
You want to see my I have all my books here. This is my Zondervan.
Oh,
it's called An
okay.
Uncertain Choice,
Okay.
and they did 3 of them.
Okay.
Yep.
And the Beholden, that series, that's your indie?
Yes. I have well, let's see. Yeah, this is one that I've done. I have one other one before that, and then I have the one that I just showed you that's coming out
Okay.
soon.
And those are
right.
those are your independent published ones, right?
Yes.
So I was wondering about the fairy tale.
Mhm.
How you got to that?
Oh, well, I decided to set my young adult novels in the Middle Ages. And so initially with Zondervan, it was a fairy tale like story, but they wanted me to ground it in a certain time, a certain period, that kind of thing. And so initially my thought was, I want to write more of a fairy tale medieval, not an actual medieval story. And so when I started branching off into doing my indie books, I decided I'm going to take it a little bit away from the actual historical. And it's set in the Middle Ages, but it's more of a fairy tale like feel than it is actual Middle Ages, if that makes sense. It's not historically accurate.
Thank you.
I had a question about your cover design for your indie books. They're gorgeous. Where are you getting your artwork and so forth?
Well, actually, I've had some different people do them. Let me see if I can find. I have all my books. Let's see. This one is, I did a brideship series. And so I did this 4th book in the brideship series. This one was designed by Bethany House, and this one was designed by my independent cover design. And you can see they are almost identical. Like if you were to look at them on Amazon, you would not know that Bethany House did not design this one, because it is almost identical to the one that they did. And I had to get permission from Bethany House to use the same fonts and all of that kind of stuff. And they were they're very gracious about it and worked with me on that. So for that particular cover and my latest indie YA, I have used a woman by the name of Rosanna White. She is also a historical romance writer for Bethany House, but she has her own cover design business, and she's fantastic. And her prices are very reasonable as well.
Yeah, I think, doesn't she have a Instagram account?
She has multiple social media. I forget if it's Rosanna White Creative or something like that. If you just Google Rosanna White and go to her website, you'll see her information, and I can send you guys the link more specifically after this meeting if any of you want her
I'll
information.
email you. Yeah, I'll email you.
Mhm.
Oh, we've got a couple of ladies leaving. Nice meeting you. Thanks so much for coming.
Bye-bye.
Hopefully
Bye.
see you next month.
God bless you.
Hope your memoir
Thank you.
goes
So
well.
Oh, thank you.
my question was, when you sign a contract, your traditional publishing, do you put in there that you will also indie publish books kind of based off of that series, or like branch off from a series? And are the publishers okay with that, or?
Contracts have really changed a lot since I first started, because when I first started, nobody was self-publishing. It was just had not come of age, or very, very few people were. It was still the age of vanity press, where you'd find a small little publisher, pay them to publish your book. So it's really changed a lot. And so contracts really reflect that now, and which is one really great reason to have an agent, because you do have to be careful how your contract is worded. And if you do have any stipulations in there that you may have to give them the first rights to your next book in that series. I haven't had that, because I have been working with Bethany House, and they're very, very good to work with, and they've been very good to me. So they haven't ever given me a hard time. They've been very supportive of my indie efforts. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
I think they realize that it's a mutually beneficial thing, that I draw in different readers when I indie publish than they can reach with my traditionally published books. And so I think that going hybrid is a really great thing, because they're able to reach readers in libraries and in so many different ways than I can. And I'm also then able to reach readers, like I mentioned, who have a somewhat different reading habits than, people who are more traditional. These are less traditional readers. And so it has been mutually beneficial. And so they've never once questioned my desire to indie publish. And like I said, even with the covers, have been very helpful in helping a series continue to have the same look.
That's
And
good. That's a good point, that it helps them, for you to be out there building an audience. It really does help them in the long run. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Any questions, Doc?
Do you outline your novels first, or you just kind of write as you go?
Well, I have had to get used to writing what's known as the synopsis. I don't know if that's a familiar term to you guys.
Yes,
but
unfortunately.
Yeah. Whenever, I have gone on to present new ideas to my publishers, they always require a synopsis. ahead of time, ahead of writing the book, before you can get your contract. And so I have just gotten into the habit of writing up sometimes a very detailed synopsis. Sometimes my synopsis is 5 pages long, 7 pages long. Sometimes it's just a few, but most often at the beginning of a series, the first book, I at least write out that synopsis that's a little bit longer, and then write a paragraph or two for each of the following books for that series as I'm getting a new contract. So that synopsis is what I work on when I start writing. I usually print that out and have it there and just kind of let that guide me as like a roadmap, and I kind of know where I'm going, but I allow for detours. I as I get going, I think of a lot of new things. And so it doesn't always end up being quite like the synopsis, but generally speaking, it's very close. And another thing I really have learned to do is flesh out my characters. So I have a very extensive character worksheet that I've developed, and I use that as I prepare before I start writing. I flesh out my hero and my heroine's personalities, likes, dislikes. I do all of their goals, motivations, their conflicts. All of that goes into that character worksheet. And again, it's not complete, because as I write, those things develop as well, and my characters come to life and I learn more about them. So, but it's very helpful to have that character worksheet at least started. And then as I go, I add things so that I can use that then kind of as that continuity. Okay, what are their dialogue tags? What kinds of character tags do they have? Do they, are they blinker? Are they, cough all the time? Like, what are their little tags? What things do they like? And I can keep track of all those little things about them, if that makes sense.
Do you find that even though as you're writing a story and you've got it planned out, that you might see a movie on TV or hear a song or read something in another book that kind of takes your story now in a different direction, or you might want to go back and add something similar to what you've seen?
Usually when I'm in the plotting stage, where like next week I'm going to be plotting a new book. And so that's the week where I'll be like, oh, I just want to watch like a bunch of medieval movies, and or I just want to watch a bunch of movies about cowboys, or like I'll kind of just start watching and taking tons and tons of notes, and just everything. Like that's my plotting stages, just brainstorm lists, like literally pages of brainstorm lists of things. And so then when I start, I'm like, okay, I could use this one particular like type of thing, or you're not copying necessarily, but it sparks creativity in yourself. And so kind of the same thing with reading books in that particular genre as well. It all kind of adds into the pot, so that then when you start, you're like, I'm feeling cowboy, like I've been living that world for the last week. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I know we're running out of time, and I wanted to, before you go, I wanted to give away a couple of books to you guys.
So nice.
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys have read any of my books. I have my upcoming release. It's The Heart of a Cowboy, and I also have Come Back to Me.
Come Back to Me.
I'd love to give away a couple of those, and I wasn't really sure how to go about it. So what if I just like ask like a question, and whoever can like then you can, it's more like here, why don't I just give you an example? Who has the most manuscripts written, not published, but just written? So if you like calculate up in your mind how many manuscripts you've written.
Pam, how many?
That'd be me.
Yeah, Pamela won. She's in the back.
Okay, so how many?
More than 50.
More than 50.
Wow.
Woo!
Yay. Okay, so you
Young adult paranormal.
She'll take the paranormal one.
I
or-
have
or
a young adult at home.
come back to me, that one?
Yeah.
Okay. That's the
Want
time
come
travel
back to
one.
me?
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
time travel. Okay, good.
Okay. All right. So all you have to do is go onto my author Facebook page and send me a message with your email, or you're not your email, but your mailing address.
Okay, are you gonna send me my
Okay.
Kindle?
No,
No, you
No,
get
I will-
actual book.
hardback?
Yeah.
I'm going to
Woo!
send you this book.
The
Yeah, I'll
paperback.
give you-
Nice.
Okay.
Very nice. Autographed and everything, right?
Autograph.
Yep.
Yes.
I'll
Okay.
send it to you. I just need your mailing address.
You
Yeah,
got it.
she'll find you.
Okay. All right. So yeah, just send me a message on Facebook. My Facebook page is really easy to find. It's just
I'll find it.
author
I'm not
Jody
worried.
Headland.
I'm not worried.
Yep,
I'll
author
find it.
Jody
She'll
Headland.
find you.
Or you
Great.
can go to my website. It's jodyheadland.com. And all my social media links are on there. Or you can send me
Yeah.
a
She's a-
message on my contact page.
Okay, great.
Okay. So winner of this book. So the next question is, who has attended the ACFW National Conference?
I never.
Oh.
Okay. So some of you have.
Oh, that's the big one in
Yeah.
Dallas? Oh, yeah, okay. I've been.
So who has gone the most time?
Oh, I've
To
done
one.
three. I've done three.
This one.
Oh, I win. Yay!
Okay. So you get my new cowboy book.
Okay, I'll email it to you. I'll email you my address.
Okay. All right.
No, okay. That's fine. Awesome.
All right.
Thank you for doing that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
What a
Yeah.
treat. Well,
I mean, I could keep going and
I
everything.
wish we
If you really
could.
want to.
I wish we could, but any last minute questions or anything? No? Okay.
Well, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about why you chose to go independent. I know you talked a little bit about that when you already were established with a traditional publisher.
Yeah, why did you become hybrid?
Well, let's see. I'm trying to remember in my writing journey where my first indie book was. And I believe it was with my Lighthouse series. What happened is Bethany House, I showed you that picture of my research of the one lighthouse up in the UP of Michigan. That was the third book in that series. And I had already planned out 2 more books. I was like, I love this series. I want to keep it going. And I pitched those ideas to my publisher when the next contract came due. And they said, no, we really want you to move on to a different series. Like 3 books is about it for a series for most traditional publishers. And so then I talked to my agent and she said, well, this might be a good thing. If you want to get your feet wet with doing some indie publishing, this might be a good opportunity for you to carry on the series and do it for yourself. And because I had been talking like, oh, I've seen people going indie and I was curious about it and I wanted to just kind of feel it out for myself. So that was kind of the first time that had crossed my mind. And it was sort of around the time when indie publishing was just really getting going. And so those were the first 2 books I did indie. And then I did the same thing with the Zondervan series. I wrote 2 more in that young adult series. And at the time that I was working with Zondervan, they wanted me to go a different direction entirely for a new YA series. And I just wasn't wanting to do that. And so I actually just decided, you know what, rather than try and come up with something new and try and please them, I just want to write what I want to write. Yeah. And so then I broke away from Zondervan and I did the books, the next series. Have been doing the last few YA series on my own. And I have no desire to try and get them traditionally published just because I've just enjoyed the flexibility and the opportunity to have that control and just to have my feet in, like I said, it draws in different readers and it's a really great experience. So I've enjoyed both. So that's why I went that direction. And I think, as I said, there's just a lot of pros to both.
A lot of authors are doing that now.
Mhm.
I have a
Yeah.
question. So I'm the one that just got the young adult, and I had actually, well, during your talk, gone in and ordered one, but I think it has a different cover. So I ordered "Come Back to Me." Is that the one I won?
Yes,
Okay, so my cover has.
that's the audio. That's the
Oh, my
audible.
cover has a red dress.
That's the Audible one, right? That's the Audible cover.
Okay.
I
You
think.
know, I haven't
Or Kindle?
actually.
It's a beautiful cover.
yeah. Yeah, I noticed when I went onto your page, the Audible version of the book has the red dress one.
Yeah, I listen to
Okay.
books on tape all the time. So
Okay.
so
I can give you if you return it, I can give you an audio copy if you'd prefer.
no, that's okay. Is the sequel's coming out, right?
Yeah. In January.
Can I just
Yeah.
wait for the sequel?
Sure.
Okay, I'm happy.
Yeah.
She's happy.
Okay. Yeah.
I did.
But
So
you'll
when you held it
contact
up,
her?
I'm like, what's a different one? Then I got looking.
Yeah. Well, and that is one thing that when you work with a traditional publisher and they
Yes.
take your book to audio or
Or hardcover. Yeah.
yeah,
I've
you have
seen that
no
happen.
control over the cover. Actually,
It's a
I found
beautiful
even
cover.
with my I have not been very pleased with some of my large print covers or even foreign print covers or you
Yeah.
know, you just
They
don't have
change
much
them.
say.
Yeah. I have noticed that. If you click on a
Yeah.
Kindle, sometimes it's a different cover than the paperback.
I'm glad I looked though.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a complete newbie, but can you do audio on your own?
Yes.
You can. Yes. And so I have done some of my books through Audible's ACX program. And so that's kind of how I started doing some of mine. But that was early on, and now there's so many choices. I actually I would suggest Find a Way, which is a new it compiles all of audiobooks for you, and so then they will send it out to Hoopla, Audible, all Overdrive, all the different audio companies that have now come about. So Find a Way is a really great way to do it. That's what I would suggest now. I actually haven't done any of my own audio. I haven't read them. I always have hired out a narrator myself, just because I know that they can do so much better than I can. And but over recent years, I've just actually contracted out my audiobooks to an audio company. It's just I just don't have the time with the kind of schedule I keep and the writing schedule now that I have to be able to keep up with the audio. So I've contracted that out, but I do highly suggest it. I highly suggest it. It's a great additional source of income.
Yeah. But there are people that independently you can just hire, like the cover of your book. You can get them to read your book
Yes.
and do an audible version of it.
Yes, you can share it with them, like on Audible. You can do an author share so that you don't have to put any money up front, a narrator, and you will always share on the royalties. Or if you want to just pay up front for your narrator, then you have that option as well, where you pay them and then all the royalties come to you once your book is published on Audible. So, you know, that was kind of a nice deal. I have a few, you know, there's a few things that have happened with Audible over the last year or two that I really highly question their business ethics. So that's why I would encourage you to publish to Find a Way. And I believe that they have kind of the same setup.
Oh, good. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
Mhm.
All right. Well, I guess we need to say goodbye. Thank you,
Yeah,
Jody. This
thank
was
you.
amazing. You're the
Thanks
best.
for having me.
Sure.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
All right. Best of luck to all of you. And if you want a book from me, send me your email or your mailing address.
Okay.
All right.
Well, thanks.
Bye, everybody.
We'll talk to you real soon.
Okay. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.